Life Curriculum, learning to address impairment and fatigue to enhance patient safety.
Nick, about your patient presentations, look, you've got to do something about them. You started out so well in the beginning, but now you seem distracted. I mean, they're completely disorganized. You've just got to do something to improve.
I just have so many thoughts running through my head so fast, and I'm just trying to fit them all into the words that I'm
Slow
saying at the same
down.
time, and there's just so many things going on. Am I talking really, really
What's
fast
the
or just
matter
faster than
with
usual?
you?
I don't know.
What are you, on speed or something? I'm calling security.
How are you doing, Millie? I haven't seen you in a while. Everything going okay?
Yeah, it's pretty much, it's okay.
You look different. Actually, you don't look well. You look like you lost a lot of weight. Are you eating all right? You know, you could take this thin model look a bit too far. You look like you lost 20 pounds in the last month or so.
What are you talking about? If anything, I've packed it on. It's what happens when you stay up late night studying. You remember munch, munch, munch a bunch of Fritos.
Daisy, how are you doing? How are you holding up?
I just got off surgery. I'm exhausted. My back and my feet are killing me.
You look it. You also look like you're ready to have your baby any minute. Come to think of it, Daisy, you really don't look very well. You know, I told you pregnancy wasn't a very good idea. Not at this time. There's no doubt that it's really been affecting your work.
In very bright, high achievers, disabilities or maladaptive behaviors may only surface under very demanding circumstances or in pressure situations. And in a stressful environment, even a normal condition like a pregnancy can impact performance. The point is, any trainee who has previously performed well and begins to manifest problems of one kind or another should be carefully monitored. The focus should be on performance and behaviors. Fortunately, much can be done to help individuals with health conditions function well, even under less than optimal circumstances. These vignettes have introduced us to several residents, each showing signs of suboptimal performance or aberrant behaviors. As faculty, we should never ignore or minimize such telltale signs. Let's see how the two program directors in our vignettes might have responded more effectively.
Your presentations, they're disorganized. They lack coherence. There doesn't seem to be any method to your describing your cases. I'm recommending that you take advantage of some of the resources that we have to help you improve your performance. Look them over, and then tomorrow bring me your plans for improvement. We can discuss them and set up a realistic timeline.
There's something very wrong with your behavior. You're spinning faster than a top. Frankly, I'm concerned, both for your safety as well as your patients. I'm going to take you off duty until you have an evaluation report clearing you for work. Get into our Medical Society's Physicians Health Program. I want you evaluated. I'm going to speak with Dr. Farrington. Let's go over to the clinic. We can pick up your labs and charts, bring them back to my office, and work on them until he arrives. Then we'll find a quiet place for you to talk.
You look like you lost 20 pounds in the last month or so.
What are you talking about? If anything, I've packed it on. It's what happens when you stay up late night studying. You remember munch, munch, munch a bunch of Fritos.
This is serious, Millie. You've been poor on details lately. You've been continually late for the clinic. And you've been irritable, and that's affecting your relationships with staff. Frankly, your performance and your behavior is worrisome in terms of patient safety. I want you to get some help. I'm taking you out of patient care until I get clearance for your return from Dr. Chavez of our Employee Health Program.
You look beat, Daisy. Maybe we need to look into what alternatives there are that might help you. You know, you're our first pregnant resident, and I don't think we even have a policy on maternity leave. This might be a good time to develop one. Family and medical leave might be an option for you. You've been here over a year, so you probably qualify. Let me check this out with the folks in Human Resources.
All residency programs have at one time or another been faced with the need to manage residents who develop physical or psychological problems. Residency programs also admit individuals who have disabling conditions, but who are, as in the language of the Americans with Disabilities Act, otherwise qualified. This program has been designed to help you understand, recognize, and handle problems in residents that may affect their residency. Specifically, it identifies some performance and behavioral patterns that suggest a disabling condition or a normal condition that may become disabling within the context of a residency, and suggests effective responses. The program also presents information on how to act responsibly towards applicants with disabilities who apply for positions in your residency program.
A problem resident is defined by the Academy of Internal Medicine as a trainee who demonstrates a significant enough problem requiring intervention by someone of authority, usually the program director or chief resident. One national survey of internal medicine residency program directors identified about 7% of residents manifested behaviors that indicated difficulties, ranging from insufficient medical knowledge to unacceptable moral or ethical behavior. The underlying causes of the behaviors included conditions such as pregnancy, stress, depression, cognitive problems that include learning disabilities or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, psychiatric illnesses that include bipolar or personality disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, medical problems such as diabetes, asthma, chronic pain, and personal problems such as heavy domestic responsibilities or disturbances in primary relationships. No program director should attempt to diagnose or evaluate etiologies of poor performance or inappropriate behaviors in residents. Program directors, by definition, must function in critical educational roles and as such are evaluators. Any attempt to act as the resident's physician, to mix roles, dilutes the pedagogical relationship. Instead, program directors should concentrate on identifying any behavioral or performance problem manifested by a resident and, if necessary, arrange for an evaluation. The focus should always remain on describing as objectively as possible the specific performance and/or behavior in question.
Clearly defining the problem and/or the behavior is the extremely important first step. Remember to state it objectively, concretely, and non-judgmentally. Let's look at some other useful strategies. Provide feedback to the resident to inform him or her of progress that they're achieving towards whatever goal needs to be met. Assign a mentor who can help provide structured supervision. If acceptable, allow the resident to have input into selecting the mentor.
Following that, program directors should create a learning contract or a plan for corrective action and come up with a timeline for improvement. If the situation involves patient or resident safety, the timeline may span minutes to hours as compared with one covering days to weeks.
Probation is always a good motivator. Probation is a more formal process of defining the performance or behavior that needs to change and define a period or a time frame during which there will be close monitoring. Determine up front how the resident will be evaluated and how frequently. Know your own policies. If you don't have them, then you need to develop them. Provide strict behavioral and performance guidelines. The resident needs to know what to do in order to succeed. Set a realistic timeline during which there will be closer scrutiny and regular scheduled feedback. Determine the consequences if the resident's performance doesn't improve or achieve the set standards within the designated time period. The consequences may include coming off probation or extending probation or even termination or non-renewal of a contract. Document this entire process carefully. Resist the tendency to diagnose the reason. Instead, refer for evaluation. You don't need the entire story from the consultant, and you don't want all the details. You do need to know when the resident can return to work safely, under what conditions, and what accommodations, if any, need to be made.
In order to refer appropriately, the program director should be knowledgeable about available resources, what they can handle, what services they offer, and how to access them. Resources might include skill improvement, the Employee Health Service, including employee assistance programs, other local services, and finally, the State Physician's Health Plan. Thorough familiarity with these resources will enable the program director to direct residents to services and thereby facilitate the process of remediation.
When you refer, you need to provide careful documentation of the issue at hand and ask your consultant for a careful and comprehensive evaluation. To achieve this, you need to ensure that your referral resources understand their role. They need to understand that residents are patient care providers, that you need to know that they're safe to do that job.
Ideally, your consultant will have experience treating physicians, since it is well known that these individuals are notoriously challenging to care for as patients. The referral resource should not only be able to treat, but also manage and monitor any condition that is diagnosed. Once the performance or behavioral problems have been addressed, the resident is then deemed fit for work and is then ready to return to duty. Your role remains that of a monitor.
I went to see the EAP people and talked about my poor presentation skills. I get a lot of anxiety, and it turns out that it really affects the way I present. Once I was clear about the problem, I was able to come up with a plan of action. The EAP is free. No notes will be put in my permanent medical record. Oh, and my wife was able to see them for a few sessions too. Turns out my behavior at home was even worse than that at work. Anyway, they're helping me with strategies to manage my anxiety. Being able to control my anxiety helps me to present more logically.
Well, I was diagnosed as bipolar when I was about 18 years old. I was on medication for it, but I thought I could stay in control without it. I was doing pretty well, and then I guess over the last month or so, I really lost it. I think my program director actually thought I was on speed. Motor mouth. She called me motor mouth. She said that being a motor mouth was affecting my overall communication skills. I kind of resented her for sending me in for an evaluation, at least at first. But I have to admit, it's really worked out. I'm back in therapy, back on my meds, and in control. And I'm talking slower these days.
A residency can be overwhelming. The one thing I felt I can control was my eating. I can decide, eat, don't eat. My program director was right. I had lost about 20 pounds. That's what my control got me. She got me to Dr. Chavez right away. He pegged the eating disorder. I'm in therapy now. Thank God it didn't go on much longer. I could have ended up in the hospital. Funny how knowing that didn't help me a bit then. Oh, God, that was a near miss.
Pregnancy can be pretty stressful as it is. Add a residency program to it and, well, I can see why pregnant residents report more problems than other women. My program was willing to accommodate a limited hours schedule. My director checked with the RRC. I'll have to make up some time, but I can do that later. In my last month, I'll be excluded from night call duty. I kind of feel bad about that because of the other residents who'll have to pick up my hours. But the good thing is that they know about it in advance, so they can plan their lives. Also, I've offered to let anybody who takes a call from me be godmother or godfather. My baby will have lots of them. And if any of them ever need some time, I'll be the first to volunteer to help them out.
The vignettes that we have just seen illustrate various conditions that might be considered disabling under very specific circumstances. A learning disability emerges only in anxiety-producing situations. A bipolar disorder hinders function only when it is not controlled with medication. An eating disorder materializes as an attempt to exert control by a person in a situation managed by others. And finally, a pregnancy which under ordinary circumstances would not be especially problematic becomes disabling within the context of a medical residency. We need now to examine how to handle the admissions process for applicants with disabilities that transcend any particular context. It is to these kinds of disabilities that the ADA most applies. Perhaps the most important feature of the ADA for our purposes is its requirement that residency programs develop accurate job descriptions that clearly outline the essential features or functions that all residents, including disabled residents, must be able to perform. Disabled individuals defined by the ADA act in three ways. A person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of his or her major life activities, a person with a record of such an impairment, or a person regarded as having such an impairment. State law may differ on conditions that meet the criteria for disability status. Many medical schools have graduated individuals who are wheelchair-bound, hearing impaired, and blind who would qualify under this act. The law states that no disabled person who is otherwise qualified can be rejected for employment because of a disability. The law also requires that when possible, reasonable accommodation should be made to help the disabled person perform the essential functions of the position. Examples of reasonable accommodation include modification of equipment or barriers that impede access, job restructuring, providing part-time or modified work schedules, adapting training materials and policies, and providing equipment to assist the person in communicating. There are two key concepts here that require further consideration: reasonable and accommodation. First, the concept of what constitutes reasonable may be relative in its application. What is reasonable for one hospital may not be for another. Larger programs and facilities will be expected to accommodate to a greater degree than smaller ones. Second, the concept of accommodation is more nuanced.
The ADA may seem complex. To simplify a bit, let's consider a resident in one of our programs. Let's say we accept, for example, a resident with a seizure disorder. And let's assume that we knew nothing of the condition when we recruited him. His seizures have been under excellent control, but now his seizures resume, possibly due to sleep deprivation from night call. Does the ADA require us to make an accommodation for him and remove him from the call schedule? Just because the resident does not declare a disability when he or she was hired does not exclude the need for evaluation and or possible coverage under the ADA in the future. If modifications in the call schedule are requested, it must be demonstrated that he or she is covered under the ADA, that a schedule with less potential for sleep deprivation is an appropriate limitation, and that the accommodation for no call is reasonable for you as an employer to implement. In this example, it's unlikely that an employer would reject this resident's need for adequate sleep as a reasonable accommodation, unless something in the on-call experience was considered intrinsic to the residency training. Even then, it might be determined that night call was taken, for instance, to work with a particular type of patient condition that more likely occurred overnight, but could allow the resident to return home to sleep during the day.
When defining the essential functions of a residency, the following definition of what they entail may be helpful. Essential functions are the fundamental tasks required by the position. They take up a substantial portion of the resident's time and, if eliminated, would fundamentally change the nature of the resident's job or educational experience. If essential functions were not performed or mastered, the consequences would be significant. These functions require expertise and can be performed only by a limited number of persons. It is important for all program directors to be thoroughly familiar with the essential functions of their residency programs and to know if residents who are, for example, wheelchair-bound, hearing impaired, or blind, residents covered under the ADA, can function successfully in their programs. For those programs that do not as yet have a formal document, the Human Resources Unit or Employee Occupational Health Unit may be a good resource to make use of in order to write a comprehensive job description. A clear description of a resident's job function, careful documentation about the person's goals, and achievement of those goals help both the institution and the individual share a special relationship and advance all of us in our understanding of one another, in our weaknesses, as well as in our strengths.